Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Bolt Breakdowns here on the Guilty as Charged podcast YouTube channel. We were off last week before free agency, or I took off because there wasn't a lot of news, and I wanted to take a big break before we dived into free agency. And we were doing live streams and all kinds of crazy stuff this week. I hope you guys have been enjoying the content we've been putting out, and I hope you guys have been enjoying the Chargers free agency because a lot of big moves have happened. So today, on Bolt Breakdowns, I want to talk about the guys the Chargers have signed, the guys they've lost in free agency, and potential signings and what this might mean for the future, both immediate draft stuff like that. So first, I guess we got to talk about the guys they've signed. So it was a pretty active first day of free agency, as many fans remember. We had the signing of Corey Linsley as the first domino to drop, a huge 5-year, $62.5 million deal. Fairly low cap hit in the first year, though, only $6.6 million. Then that news was followed up with the re-signing of Michael Davis, brought back on about a 3-year, $24-ish million deal. 8.4 is his average annual value. And then we also had the signing of Matt Filer, who is somewhere on this table. Where is he? Somewhere. But we did have the signing of Pittsburgh offensive lineman. There he is, Matt Filer, on a $5 million cap hit. So that was a pretty active first day. It got a little bit quiet after that, as people have known. But those were the three kind of big signings on day one. So wanted to give my take on each one. Corey Linsley is a huge signing. It is a massive improvement over, obviously, Dan Feeney. The Chargers had the 32nd worst offensive line via PFF last year, dead last. Getting the best center, especially as a guy who's going to be a primary communicator on the offensive line, a guy who is kind of going to lead it. I think that's a huge signing. And, as much as people complain about the Chargers not being as active in the last couple days, and maybe they just view this Corey Linsley signing through the lens of the Balaga signing last year, it is not a Balaga signing. This is a huge move for the Chargers, one that I think they had to make, one that I predicted they would make. Dan Feeney has left the team, which we'll get to a little bit later, but Corey Linsley is obviously a massive improvement over him, and that can't be overstated. His contract actually isn't that bad, too. This is something that I've talked about a little bit, but if you go through his cap hits on Spot Track, he actually has relatively low cap hits the first 2 years, 6.6 million, I believe, this year, 11.6 million next year. They actually have potential outs in 2023 and 2024 sort of built into the contract. In 2025, he has a $17 million dead cap hit, but by then they can decide to cut him or, restructure. So it's actually a very good contract, both for the Chargers and Corey Linsley. So I got to say, I was very impressed with that one, especially with the amount of competition I believe that the Chargers had. Michael Davis was re-signed to a 3-year, 8.4 million average, about 25.2 million, I believe. 6.4 million cap hit. Cap hits are pretty good. They had to re-sign Michael Davis, and I got scared on Monday when it was rumored that the Michael Davis market was going to be big. It didn't end up quite being as big as reported. But Michael Davis is a huge part of this team. He fits, exactly what Staley will need defensively, especially after the team like Casey Hayward walk. You had to have Michael Davis back. I might have been so angry that I might have not done this video if Michael Davis wasn't back. It was a crucial signing for the secondary, and we'll see what other moves they make at cornerback. Obviously, Kyle Fuller has been the rumor, either going to maybe Denver, the Chargers, or the Colts. So we'll see what happens there. But he hasn't been officially released, so the Chargers at this juncture would have to trade for him. So we'll monitor that situation. And then obviously the last signing was Matt Filer, who is basically an all-around offensive lineman. He could play right tackle, he could play right guard, he could play guard, left guard. I think the Chargers do envision him as more of a guard type, but this is actually a really helpful signing, especially knowing Balaga's injury history on this team, the ability to switch him around the offensive line as need be. I think they kind of needed somebody like that. But hopefully Balaga doesn't get injured, and you can just keep Matt Filer either to the left or right of Corey Linsley. So we'll see how that goes. I'm very excited with all these signings that they made on day one. Honestly, I think they're all very good value. Even though they overpaid for Corey Linsley, I think he's going to be worth the deal he got. I also think Michael Davis is worth the deal he got. And I think Matt Filer, that was a guy that we were talking about kind of later towards the beginning of free agency. I think he's going to be a pretty good fit. And the fact that he can play tackle and guard, I think, is a huge gain for the Chargers, especially given Balaga's history, and especially given this offensive line's history in general. It's not just Balaga getting hurt, so I don't want to single him out. And then the last signing of free agency, really to this point, two small signings. We did have Brandon Faison and Michael Badgley get re-signed, but we also had Jared Cook. So Hunter Henry has obviously left to the Chargers, which we'll get to in a bit, but Jared Cook is his replacement. It's a 1 year, $4.5 million deal. So if you want to put his cap hit in, because SpotTrack has not put his cap hit in yet, basically you want to put $4.5 million. It's a 1 year, $6 million, but his cap hit based on his guaranteed money will be $4.5. So if you were to kind of plug it in right here, that would leave the Chargers with about $28 million in cap space to work with, minus $10 million for the rookie deals. So the Chargers have about $18 million or so in available spending space. So we'll see how they use that again in week 2 in free agency, which we'll get to a little later. So the Jared Cook signing, this one was an interesting one. I know we talked about Zach Ertz a lot. There were reports that the Chargers were kind of in on Zach Ertz for a while. But then it seems like the Eagles' asking price just got too ridiculous. It didn't seem like the Bills or the Chargers were willing to budge. And then the Chargers kind of, cashed their chips and were like, all right, we're out. And we're going to go sign Jared Cook. So I'm kind of mixed on this one. I get why Steven dislikes this one a little bit more than I do. I think there's two things, right? Familiarity with the system, right? The fact that Frank Smith was his coach in his 2018 Pro Bowl season in Oakland, tight ends coach, I mean. And then you have Joe Lombardi, who obviously comes over from as the quarterback's coach of the Saints, knows how he's used in that system, and he also had a Pro Bowl season in 2019 with the Saints. So I think it'll be interesting to see how he's used. I think that they're still going to develop Parham, potentially a rookie tight end, under Jared Cook. That is going to be a thing they do. But really, it's a 1 year low risk deal, right? If you like what you see out of Parham and potentially, say, Tommy Tremble, you can kind of move on from Jared Cook next year, right? If you don't like what you've seen from them and you want to see them develop a little bit more, you can bring Jared Cook back, right? It's a low risk signing, and I think it's one that's good for the moment. It's not as exciting as Zach Ertz. It's not as exciting as maybe Kyle Rudolph would have been. But for what the moment is, I think it's an okay signing. I would probably grade it as a B. It's all right. The age does concern me a little bit. But like I said, it does give them long-term flexibility. And I think that that's kind of what they wanted, right? So now if you have Jared Cook, like I said, you can develop a rookie, you can develop Parham behind him, and then see where you are in a year, right? So I think that's what the Chargers want to do. I'm a little disappointed they didn't try to go a little harder after Ertz, but if the Eagles' asking price was too high, it was too high. That's kind of, I guess, the perspective I view it with. The other thing with Ertz is he wanted to test free agency next year. And so if he has a career year where he has 800 to 900 yards and a good amount of touchdowns, the Chargers may not have been able to kind of pay him what he wanted, right? Especially when you consider they may have to re-sign Mike Williams. They may have to extend Derwin James should he stay healthy. And they have a couple moves like Chris Harris and Linval Joseph next year. How do you sign or replace them, right? So I think Zach Ertz really might have only been a 1 year deal. And I think that's why Telesco was hedging on the idea of giving up so much cap space for it, right? Whereas a team like the Bills, who are also kind of the reported team, they're all in it this year, right? The Bills window is these next 2 or 3 years in particular. One, before they have to pay Josh Allen. Two, while they have all this talent that they do on the team in their primes, they that's what they're going to do, right? They have to compete, so it may make more sense for them to go after an Ertz in a trade than the Chargers ultimately. But we'll monitor that, see how that goes. It wouldn't surprise me, honestly, if the Eagles end up cutting Ertz if they're not getting the compensation they want. It would be a dead cap hit, but they already have a ton of dead cap hits. So I'm not sure that matters. I don't know if the team is really going to trade the compensation they want for him. And it was rumored that they were kind of considering cutting him before, free agency started. So I really don't know what they're going to do. But the next thing that we do have to talk about is the Chargers and the guys. Well, we're already talking about the Chargers. I mean, the departures is what I meant to say. And yeah, they had a lot of guys depart. We have Hunter Henry, who's obviously the primary guy who left. He left to New England on a 3-year, $37.5 million deal. Rayshon Jenkins leaves on a 4-year, $35 million deal to Jacksonville. We have Dan Feeney leaving for a 1-year deal with the Jets. Isaac Rochelle, 1-year deal with the Colts. Nick Vigil, 1-year deal with Minnesota. Cole Toner reached an agreement with Houston. Denzel Perriman went to Carolina. Tyrod Taylor departs for Houston on a relatively lucrative deal for him. And they also just traded for Ryan Finley, weirdly. I'm not sure quite why they did that. They do have quite a few other internal free agents left, like Melvin Ingram. Michael Davis is still listed here. I don't know why. But Melvin Ingram, Sam Tevi might be a guy to watch. He's somewhere down there. Forrest Lamp. I don't know. Forrest Lamp hasn't signed anywhere, but he's been pursued, I think, by Minnesota also. I don't know why Minnesota is stealing this many Chargers offensive line pieces, but it is what it is. So in terms of talking about the departures, Hunter Henry is the biggest one, and it's why they signed Jared Cook. It's why they have to go in a new direction at tight end. And I said this on the show. I wasn't personally comfortable paying Henry as much as he wanted, which was clearly 12.5 to 13 million. After the Jonnu Smith contract, we thought he could get like 14, but that wasn't meant to be on this market. But I think it's kind of clear that this was a bit of a mutual parting of the ways. I think Hunter Henry did really want to play in New England, connections to Belichick and all. And, if that's what he wants to do, I don't know if there was anything other than an insane amount of money that the Chargers could have thrown at him to really deter him from doing that. So it is what it is. Maybe you get a comp pick out of it next year. We'll see what happens. But I just always struggled with paying Henry as much as he wanted because, you can, as I said on the podcast, you could say Hunter Henry is a top 10 tight end, but I don't believe Hunter Henry is truly one of those difference maker tight ends that you have out there. That's like a Travis Kelce, Darren Waller, George Kittle, these, athletic freaks that completely change your offense. Hunter Henry just isn't that. The main reason that I kind of wanted to keep him was you have that familiarity with Herbert. It's not a great thing to take away, but I don't think in terms of production that there's going to be a massive drop off with Jared Cook. If you actually compare their 2020 productions, even though Jared Cook had, a lot less percentage of snaps, he actually had a pretty, solid 2020 in terms of production, at least now. Hunter Henry's skills as a blocker will need to be replaced because Jared Cook is not a blocker. But just purely in terms of receiving yards and touchdowns, I believe that Jared Cook had like 504 yards and 7 touchdowns. Hunter Henry had 613 and fewer touchdowns. I want to say 3 or 4. So they're not actually that different in terms of production, which is why I think the Chargers wanted to move on. But they will have to find a blocking tight end, whether that's Donald Parham, whether that's a rookie, whether that's somebody else. Do you bring Virgil Green back? Maybe. I think they're going to have to find someone that's a blocking tight end. That's kind of the biggest part of the Henry loss because he did improve as a blocker last year. Rayshon Jenkins goes on a 4-year, $35 million deal to Jacksonville. Sort of unexpected. I mean, I did think he was going to leave the Chargers. I didn't think he was going to get that much from Jacksonville, but safety play is a bit thin around the league, and Jacksonville has plenty of money to throw. So that's kind of why I think he ended up there. I think that it's a loss for the Chargers because I would have liked seen another year for Rayshon and, him in this Staley system. But I think this might be kind of a vote of confidence for Nasir Adderley, who they're going to play more of a deep safety role now. We'll see how that works out. But that, the fact that they were willing to let go Rayshon Jenkins, and frankly, it just seems like they got outbid and there was a number that they weren't willing to go past. I think it's a loss, but it's nothing that I think is insurmountable at the position. So those were sort of the two big free agents they lost. And obviously, you have sort of your depth pieces they lost as well, right? Dan Feeney, gone. Isaac Rochelle, gone. Nick Vigil, gone. Denzel Perriman, Cole Toner, face on his back. But a lot of these guys are gone. Tyrod Taylor, gone, right? As the backup quarterback, maybe it's Easton Stick time. I've already spoken to death about that on the podcast, so I'm not going to go further. But this team did lose some depth. I think that's a little bit concerning, but also I don't necessarily think that Dan Feeney and Rochelle and Vigil are the hardest players to replace. Perriman is someone I might have wanted to bring back, but I can see why, maybe because of the Staley scheme and all the things they're going to be doing, that they didn't really necessarily feel a need. We'll see how they sort of fill the linebackers back up. I think out of these kind of lower losses, the two that I would have liked to really kept are Cole Toner and Nick Vigil. Cole Toner had a good year last year in the games that he played, and I would have liked to see him stay in kind of a depth role, even if it meant, giving him a little bit of a pay bump. And then for Nick Vigil, I thought he also played really good year on a small contract. So those are kind of the two guys that I think that I might have wanted to negotiate with, but I think it was expected that they weren't willing to pay this much for Hunter Henry, weren't willing to pay that much for Rayshon Jenkins, and that's just kind of how free agency boiled down. We'll have to see how many other players the Chargers lose in free agency and how many players they sign. That will obviously be important for the comp pick formula. As we know, the Chargers do have a compensatory pick this year, so we'll see if they get one next year, depending on what they do in the rest of free agency. Okay, so now that we've talked about these two things, I want to talk about the remaining free agent list. I'm sure Schefter has sent some notification on my phone that maybe will negate everything I say here. So, I'm a little bit worried about that. But let's talk about the guys that are actually available in these, weeks in the second week of free agency that we're going into. Statuses available. All right. So I want to talk about the guys that the Chargers kind of can sign. We kind of have a lot of guys here, actually. Alex Smith, quarterback. Do they want a backup quarterback, or are they going to roll with Easton Stick? I personally prefer a backup, but, someone like Alex Smith, but it depends. How much do you want to spend on him? I don't know exactly how much you'll have to. Geno Atkins was released from Cincinnati. I think that could be an interesting kind of signing. I don't know how much he would cost. He would probably take like a 1 year, $5-6 million deal. I wouldn't hate that move. Personally, I think they could always, bolster the depth on the interior. Right now, it's really just Linval Joseph, Jerry Tillery, and Justin Jones, which I'm not super comfortable with because I think Linval Joseph is kind of the only really solid player out of that group. So if they wanted to pursue Geno Atkins, I kind of wouldn't hate it. Kawan Short, a bit over the hill at this point. Melvin Ingram. So Melvin Ingram's market has been kind of ice cold in free agency, a little bit colder than I thought it would be. Granted, he was injured last year and did have 0 sacks. I wouldn't be shocked if Melvin Ingram came back on the Chargers on a 1-year deal, just because it sets him up for 2022 free agency, and in the interim for the Chargers, it helps them out in terms of not having to freak out and maybe overdraft an edge or figure out what you want to do with Nwosu. I think a 1-year deal could make sense for both sides. It's just a matter of, as like I've been saying with a lot of these players, does Brandon Staley see them as a defensive fit in the system? I don't know. And the thing is, Ingram wasn't super acclimated to, the Pagano 3-4 that they ran back in 2016. I don't think he did super great with that, but Staley 3-4 is also kind of a different beast. And, 3-4, as we've said, is a little bit of a misnomer for what the defense actually is. Carlos Dunlap, AJ Bouye. AJ Bouye may be a guy to watch. I think that he is, obviously you have the connection to Ronaldo Hill, who was in Denver. You have the connection to Chris. No, you don't have a connection to Chris Harris. You do have the connection to Ronaldo Hill, though, who was in Denver. It would be interesting if they brought him in. I thought he looked a little cooked last year, and obviously he has the suspension problem. So I don't know what they're going to do there. But if you want to bring him in, I think he has to miss the first 2 games of the season, is the rule, because I think he served like 6 of the 8-game suspension, something like that. But I don't remember exactly how many games it was. Quan Alexander, interior linebacker. I don't know if they have a ton of need for him unless he wants to play a depth role. I kind of don't know what his evaluation is. T.Y. Hilton is available. Is a guy worth mentioning because Tom Telesco was obviously with him when he was in Indianapolis. Maybe they sneak him in for a little bit of wide receiver depth. And if he gets hurt, it's not a particularly big deal because you do have Jalen Guyton, you do have Tyron Johnson. Maybe they take a flyer on him. Wouldn't shock me. Jadeveon Clowney. Interesting name to still be here. I don't really know if they would go for it because he's not much of a pass rusher at this point in his career. He's kind of specifically a run stuffing guy. But he is 28. I do think he still has at least a year or 2 kind of left it with good production in him. So maybe they take a shot flyer on him. Malcolm Butler, no. Eric Fisher, problem is the Achilles, right? And not Justin Simmons just signed the contract extension with Denver. We have Trey Turner. I don't think they'll be bringing Trey Turner or Casey Hayward back. Kareem Jackson is a free agent. I'm not sure quite what his role would be on this team. Maybe they move him to free safety to play next to Derwin, I guess. But Kareem Jackson's kind of old. I don't know. The reason I don't like him is he's a bit of a headhunter when he tackles too, as we saw with the Chargers games this year. Again, the safety question really depends on how does the coaching staff view Adderley in terms of being able to play deep safety in a Staley scheme next year. I don't quite know the answer to that question, but I think the fact that they were able to kind of let Rayshawn walk without overpaying him, that might be a little bit of a sign of confidence, but who knows. Leonard Floyd, Levante David obviously signed, Golden Tate, Sean Jackson, Richard Sherman. I don't think he's really built to play corner in a Staley scheme. I guess it would be interesting, but there's other cornerbacks that I kind of like that we'll get to a little bit later on this available free agent list. Sort of a whole lot of nothing. KJ Wright. I don't know. I feel like KJ Wright's still. They list him as outside linebacker, which I mean he is a decent pass rusher, but he's really a linebacker. He's not. He's really an interior guy that kind of works all over the field. I don't think they would sign him though, because he's probably not willing to play a depth role, and they have Tranquil and you have Murray. So, and Kaiser White, who I think Staley will want to use. So I don't know if they'll really go after KJ Wright kind of type. Jaquiski Tart. Someone actually mentioned this to me, but Jaquiski Tart would be an interesting signing. I think he's had a good couple of years of in San Francisco, and if you want to have a buffer for Nasir Adderley or someone else to develop, Alohi Gilman too, I think he could be an interesting signing to play with Derwin. I don't know how much he'll cost, but I can't imagine it's more than a 1 or 2 year deal for him. Here we go. Fun conversation here. Alejandro Villanueva. So it was kind of a really quiet week for Alejandro Villanueva in free agency. Not a lot happened with him, and I don't know how to really judge that. So I sort of think that Villanueva might be in the Chargers considerations because, he's going to wind up in the second week. The offensive tackle market has not been moving like some offensive tackles have wanted it to after the Trent Williams signing. I wouldn't be shocked if the Chargers signed him to a 1 or 2 year deal. I said this to Steven, and Steven sent me back a vomit emoji, which I think is a little bit harsh. I definitely think my preference is drafting a tackle, but it really wouldn't surprise me if, also considering Balaga's a cuttable contract next year, maybe they go after Villanueva on sort of a short-term deal. I think he'd be okay. It would be an upgrade over what they had. But Steven and Tyler's objection, which I kind of agree with, is, he's a bit of a stopgap offensive lineman when you can get your offensive lineman in the future in the draft. Granted, if you sign him to a 1-year deal that's low enough, his market value seems to have dropped a little bit from what it was. Then, maybe you can still draft a Christian Darrisaw or, somebody who's going to be the future guy. Back to safeties. Trey Boston is a free agent. I mean, it would be an interesting reunion with the Chargers. Obviously part of that early Jack Boys secondary. I wouldn't hate bringing him back. I think he's kind of in the same vein as like Jaleel Adai, who I mentioned before. He can make plays. I mean, I don't think you want him out there for a lot every game, but I think it's an interesting depth signing if it were to happen. So NFL Rumors has linked Todd Gurley to the Chargers. Todd Gurley is not coming to the Chargers. That would be stupid. I don't know. Cordero Patterson. Cordero Patterson has not reached a deal with Chicago, obviously. Obviously, special teams specialist plus wide receiver. I think that would be an interesting signing for the Chargers. And also, fun fact, going back to the college days, Brandon Staley was actually a coach of his. What was the school called that Brandon Staley went to? There was a year, though, where Brandon Staley did coach him. I'm forgetting the name of the school. John Carroll University is where Brandon Staley was actually on a team as a coach with Cordero Patterson as a player. And, it's a deep connection. But I think Cordero Patterson would obviously help out a lot with special teams, and getting you consistent return play there. And obviously, you can use him as a wide receiver a little bit. And, I don't think the Chargers should go out and sign a receiver. But if you get that special teams play and you can put him on for, some snaps in a game, I think Cordero Patterson is a decent weapon. Obviously, depends on how much he wants because he hasn't been satisfied with the offers that the Bears have been giving him so far. Names to talk about. Chase Daniel. Detroit has released Chase Daniel. He is available. Obviously, there's connections to this coaching staff when it comes to Daniel. I think that he would be an interesting backup signing. I really said any veteran backup is decent, and Chase Daniel would be one of the cheaper ones that you can go get. Allow Easton Stick a little bit more time to develop. And, you have Chase Daniel as Justin Herbert's primary backup. And I just have better faith in him to carry or close out a game if Justin Herbert has to be out for a short amount of time. That's just ultimately what it comes down to. Mackenzie Alexander. Mackenzie Alexander is a cornerback from Cincinnati, sort of was overshadowed a little bit by William Jackson, who just got signed this week by Washington, right? He's a little bit overshadowed by William Jackson, but I actually like his kind of coverage skills a lot. I think he could offer a bit to this team, at least in terms of depth, and then maybe you go for a cornerback in the draft, but he might be one of those guys that's available on a 1-year deal that you can go out and sign. So I wouldn't be surprised if they went after a Mackenzie Alexander type. Man, I really hope Schefter doesn't tweet anything that makes this illegitimate within the next hour or so. Okay, but yeah, that's really all the free agents that I'm kind of interested in. People have mentioned Malik Hooker. I'm actually okay. I'd be okay with a Malik Hooker signing. I think it gives them some depth at free agency. Yeah, I mean, that's really kind of it. I don't think there's a whole lot of guys that you want. I know Steven has been talking about Adoree Jackson. I'm not against Adoree Jackson. I think he's going to be pricey, though. And the Chargers are in the Kyle Fuller sweepstakes, like I mentioned, right? So if they sort of trade a pick for him, right, or they sign him, they might be waiting to see that first before making a true attempt at Adoree Jackson. But Adoree Jackson is going to cost some money. And I don't know how many years he'll cost exactly either. But in this market, who knows? Because there have been guys getting really confusing deals just all over the place. Nelson Aguilar makes double the salary as Juju Smith-Schuster. So, who knows where we really are anymore with this free agency cycle. Yeah, it's kind of it. Mercedes Lewis actually would be an interesting signing. He's a really good blocking tight end. And I don't know if he'd be willing to commit to a full-time backup role, because that's probably what he would do if Jared Cook was here. Or Jared Cook is here, I should say. But Mercedes Lewis is older, but he's a really good blocker. I wouldn't be stunned if instead of maybe going all out on Zach Ertz if he's cut, that the Chargers sign a guy like Mercedes Lewis to be sort of their Virgil Green. But that ultimately depends on what kind of role they want for him and what role he wants as sort of maybe a backup. Does he want to be a starter? We really don't know. That's kind of all the guys for the Chargers that I really have envisioned. I mean, I'm sure it's in like alphabetical order or some shit. So I'm sure there's guys down the list. Sam Tevi, mentioned him before. Wouldn't mind having him back for depth right now because the O-line behind the O-line is looking a little bit thin. But yeah, that's really the exhaustive first week recap of free agency. And, we'll see what they do. I do want to talk a little bit about draft implications, right? Draft implications are the big thing with this free agent class. And really, I don't know if we've seen a lot of movement in terms of where they want to go with the first round pick. They have fleshed out the offensive line, obviously, with Linsley and Filer, but the tackle spot is still kind of barren, right? So can you afford to skip a tackle in the first round with the way the tackle spot is, right now? Probably not. If you sign Alejandro Villanueva, maybe that changes. I don't know. For Tom Telesco's, internal calculus on which guys he wants to take. But that's really where we're at right now. I don't think there have been too many draft implications yet. I do think still cornerback, edge, offensive line are the clear needs on this team. Maybe if they trade for Kyle Fuller, those needs move around in terms of importance. But that's really where we are in free agency right now. Let me know down in the comments below. Were there any moves that you were disappointed that the Chargers didn't make? Were there any moves that you want them to make in week 2? Let me know in the comments down below. So peace out, Bolt fam.